Welcome to Passion for Sound, the channel dedicated to thorough and honest reviews of headphones, earphones, DACs, headphone amps, other components and accessories. Basically everything audio related except power amps and passive speakers. My name's Lachlan and my goal is to explore and discuss all kinds of audio topics, even the controversial ones, to help us all find more enjoyment from music. Thanks for watching and enjoy the video. Hey folks, welcome to another Passion for Sound audio review. Now before I kick off, I just want to mention that this is not sponsored by Geshelli Labs. These products have nothing to do with Geshelli Labs. I just happen to be wearing their t-shirt today, and I'll gladly wear any t-shirt of any brand that I like. It doesn't mean I'm sponsored by them or have any invested interest there. So I just wanted to get that out of the way quickly before we get into the review. What I'm actually here to talk about today is the Tita IEM from OE Audio. Now a little while back I reviewed on the channel OE Audio as a maker of accessories and parts for IEM users. And so that included the cable that you can see attached here to the IEMs. I'll talk about that shortly. But I kept this review separate because this is a finished product you can buy direct from them, ready to go. Whereas everything else in my other review was about the accessories, so aftermarket cables, adapters to turn MMCX into 2 pins, that sort of stuff. Whereas this is just about an IEM that you can buy like any other IEM, and indeed like a couple others that I've got here. So in addition to talking about the Tita IEM here, I'm going to talk about the C Audio Yume, I think that's how it's said, and also the Tanchjim Hana or Hana. So both of those have similar pricing to the Tita. They happen to arrive for their reviews just as I was preparing this one, so it made sense to talk about all three. This is a focused review on the Tita. It's not a review of those other two, but there are reviews coming. So make sure you subscribe if you want to see the reviews of those other two, and stay tuned for when they drop. For now though, let's talk about the Tita. So the Tita seems to have a couple of different names. I'm calling it the Tita because that's what the link on their website says when you go to click through to look at this particular IEM. But I've also seen it listed as the BA-1TI and also the Tita BA-1TI. So I'm not sure exactly what they refer to it as. I'm going to call it the Tita from now on. It retails for $169 US with the cable, or you can get it without the cable for $129 US. If you've watched my video about the OE audio equipment, you'll know that I really like this cable, so I do think it's worth getting with the cable unless you happen to have a really high quality cable somewhere already. So for $169, what you're getting is a pair of single BA IEMs, so balanced armature IEMs, and the cable, which is a pure copper cable, and a very nice cable. It's lightweight, it's not the most sort of solid and rugged cable I've ever used, but it's a decent quality cable with good sound quality. What's more important though are these two pieces on the ends, the IEMs themselves. And there's a few things that are a bit unique about these. They use an MMCX connector to each earpiece, that's not the unique thing, but after that things do get interesting. Underneath the ear tips, what you find is a titanium nozzle. Now, according to the marketing on the OE website, the nozzle here is designed to improve the extension of treble, and it's reminiscent from the titanium nozzle used on something like the Fit Ear to Go, which was a wonderful IEM that I owned for many years and had a very smooth and enjoyable character to its treble. So I was keen to see if having that titanium nozzle improved the sound from the Titas, or at least made them sound good. Obviously it's not going to improve them, it's how they were designed from the beginning, but whether or not it gave them good sound was what I was interested in. The other unique thing about these though is this back piece here, which you can probably see in the video is currently silver, but there are 3 different back pieces provided. So the idea with the Titas is that you can remove the back pieces and change the sound by changing the amount of damping each of those back pieces applies to the driver on the inside. Now this is just mechanical damping as far as I can tell. All it's doing is changing the amount of venting to change the amount of airflow through the driver, through the housing and out the nozzle. As I'll talk about shortly, having the ability to tune the drivers slightly is excellent, but it's a little bit flawed in my opinion, as I'll talk about when we talk about sound quality. Before we get to the sound quality though, I do want to mention that the overall fit and finish and quality of these is really, really solid. For a relatively cheap IEM, as I said, the cable's quite decent, the feel of the housings is good, removing and replacing the little back caps has also been really solid. Probably the only complaint I can make is in the ones they call brass, which are more of a rose gold look. In that particular cap, when I screwed in the little tiny grub screw that holds the cap in place, it has made a little ripple around the edge of the screw hole, where I'm guessing as it started to get a little bit of bite, it's maybe just warped the metal slightly because the metal's quite thin. It's not a big deal, but it's just a minor blemish on an otherwise really nicely made IEM. The final thing to mention is the provided ear tips are quite nice. They look like spin fit tips, but they're not, but they're still nice tips. And finally, they come with this quite nice leather pouch as well. It's not a particularly protecting pouch, it's very thin leather, there's no major substance to it, but it's going to do a decent job of protecting them from general knocks and bumps and the like in a bag. So everything so far is looking okay for a $169 earphone. Then it all comes down to sound quality. As I said, we've got 3 different tunings, so trying to work out how to present this to you was a bit of a question in my mind as I started out. So I'm going to start with what I initially found to be my preferred tuning cap, and that's the rose gold or brass one. The sound with the rose gold cap attached is smooth and quite rich for a single balanced armature driver, but it does lack a little bit of air and extension. That means the soundstage was also quite intimate, and so as I listened to it more and more, it was fine, it was enjoyable enough, but it never really grabbed me because it didn't have that sense of space and grandeur to the sound that I think was needed just to open up the experience a bit. As it was, it just sounded like listening to a decent pair of earbuds, but nothing special. A couple of the tracks that I listened to during my testing were Nocturne and End of the Line from the Tron soundtrack. In listening to those, I was actually really impressed at how well the single balanced armature drivers in the Titas were able to produce a sense of richness and warmth in the sound. And I'd put that down to the way they're tuned, which I'll show you on screen now, that has a bit of a mid-bass hump that I think is making up for the fact that these roll off quite heavily in the sub-bass. So when I started looking into it more, if I had tracks that needed sub-bass, these wouldn't quite give you the feeling that you needed. But for a lot of other tracks, they had that mid-bass lift that still made things feel warm and punchy where needed. The tuning actually reminds me a little bit of a Grado tuning, but I mean that in a good way. If you've seen my RS1 review, you'll know I'm not always a fan of Grado sound, but these remind me a little bit of the Grado tuning in the sense that it's that mid-bass bump gives them the sound that they have, even though they lack the deeper bass. Their treble's quite a different approach to Grado, so don't think that these are equivalent to a Grado headphone in all ways, but that mid-bass hump is quite reminiscent of what I've experienced there. So having played around a bit with the rose gold or the brass caps, I decided to try a couple of the others, and I might show you on screen now what the tuning looks like with all 3 caps. So you've got the black in black, you've got the rose gold in that yellowy gold colour, and then you've got the silver in the grey colour on the chart. And what you can hopefully see there is that they're all very, very similar with just slight differences. So after using the rose gold, I moved to the silver cap as the one that I thought was probably in the middle of the 3. And in general, I'd say it was slightly better than the rose gold. It's a slightly more open presentation, and I'd put that down to the slight pullback on the bass. But at the same time, it made the treble just a little bit edgier because now there's not as much bass to mask some of that treble. Unfortunately, moving to the silver tips also reveals what I think is probably the weakest part of the Titas presentation, and that's in the quality of their treble. The treble is quite dry. It's not overly peaky or overly bright, but it's just dry and a little bit edgy. I don't find it overly enjoyable to listen to. Certainly with the silver caps and also actually with a pair of spiral dots attached, I found the Titas to be an enjoyable earphone and completely fine, and I'd be happy listening to them. But I just think, as you'll hear shortly, there's other options on the market that are better than the Titas. So to quickly close out the sound quality section, moving to the black caps took them a step too far into that treble space, making them drier still and less enjoyable and more edgy. So ultimately, for me, if I was going to listen to these, it would be with the silver caps, but also with the caveat that I don't think they're the best IEM that I've heard in and around that price point. Finally, I should mention, having just talked through the caps, that my experience in listening to the caps didn't really match up with what was written in the marketing materials. So according to the OE marketing materials, the black caps actually are meant to have the most bass and the most dynamics, what I found was the opposite, which was that they had less bass and were a drier, more neutral sound. Potentially a touch more energetic because of the extra treble, but certainly not my preference in terms of overall sound signature. So if you were to buy these, don't worry too much about what the box says should sound like what. It's better that you play with them yourself and find out what you like, and particularly if you're combining different tips with different ear caps. Now, I'm not going to go into that set of combinations because you could go mad changing caps and tips and have all sorts of, millions of different variations. For me, I've only talked about this with the stock tips and that quick mention of spiral dots. And for me, the combination of the silver caps with the stock tip or a spiral dot tip is a nice balance of treble detail, extension, a slightly more open soundstage, but still a decent sense of punch. However, as I said before, they're not the best IEM around and about the price point. Case in point being the two IEMs to my right. I'm going to start with the slightly cheaper one, which is the Tanchjim Hana. Now again, I don't know if I'm saying these words right, so I apologise. If anybody knows the correct pronunciations for this or the C Audio Yume, please let me know down in the comments below. For now though, I'm going to call it the Hana, and it's an IEM from Tanchjim. This is a single dynamic driver as opposed to the single balanced armature driver, and it also costs about $10 less. Ergonomically, I think it's a much superior design. Being an over-ear and more of that sort of teardrop shaped design, it sits really nicely in the ear versus the bullet style that goes kind of straight into the ear canal. The bullets can be good for those that like a really deep insertion, but for long-term comfort, I definitely find the Hana's better. In terms of sound quality, the Hana is a warmer, richer sound. It doesn't produce the space or maybe the sense of texture and clarity that the Tita does, but I do think it's a better overall signature and better balance. Listening to Black Star by David Bowie, the Tita came across dry and too thin, whereas the Hana sounded pretty good. It wasn't great, it's not the best thing I've heard, but I think it was a more enjoyable listen than the Tita on that particular track. And that for me is telling because I want an earphone that's going to sound pretty good across all sorts of stuff. The Tita for me is going to be one of those that bites you sometimes, whereas the Hana is going to be pretty good on pretty much everything. Neither of them, I should add, are 100% great, but they're both okay, with the Hana being slightly more okay. One final point that separates these two is that the Hana throws a wider soundstage, so despite being a slightly warmer headphone with a little bit less sense of extension in the treble, it does produce a better, wider soundstage. And that's something else I enjoy, and probably another reason why, with both of them being slightly imperfect, I do still lean towards the Hana. So now let's look at a like-for-like comparison. Two earphones that cost exactly the same amount of money. Moving over now to the C Audio Yume. So the Yume here is a dynamic driver coupled with balanced armatures. So it's a three-way or a three-piece hybrid using a pair of balanced and a single dynamic. That's all housed once again in a much more ergonomic shell, allowing for over-ear wearing and a nice snug fit inside the concha of the ear. So it's more comfortable, it's a better looking IEM I think, and it's also a better sounding IEM. The Yume does lose out a little bit on that mid-bass punch that the Tita has, but the overall sound signature is much better balanced and the delivery is also smoother across the board. The Yume soundstage is much bigger with a much better sense of space and focus of the image, and all in all I just think it's the better earphone, clearly and hands down. I'm not going to jump on the hype train, and as you'll hear in my review of the Yume, there's some things about it I don't necessarily love, but out of these two, at exactly the same price, it's a no-brainer for me to choose the C Audio Yume. Both earphones have a fairly similar overall signature with a bit more mid-bass punch coming from the Tita, but a better balance overall coming from the Yume, and so the smoothness and the soundstage of the Yume is what wins out for me. But ultimately, if you were looking at the Tita and asked me which earphone you should buy, I'd probably say to buy the Moondrop SSP. And the reason I say that instead of the Yume is not because the Yume is bad, but for me I think if you're looking at something like the Tita in terms of a compact, affordable, simple IEM that has a bit of treble emphasis and a bit of bass, I think the SSP from Moondrop does a much better job of what the Tita seems to be aiming to do in its tuning. They're still a bit different, and unfortunately I don't have the SSP here to compare because I've lent it to one of the channel patrons to check out, but from memory, I would choose the SSP because it provides a similar sense of treble focus at times as the Tita, but it does it in a much better way with a much smoother presentation. And on the flip side, the bass from memory has a bit better extension and a bit better overall balance with the rest of the signature. You can't tune the SSPs, but they're cheaper, I think they look better, and they're also more comfortable. So for me, it's a no-brainer. If that's the style of earphone you're looking for, I'd just go in that direction. If though you've just got $170 odd to spend, I'd say the Yume are a better choice than the Titas. Now, I'm never a fan of having to say negative things about an IEM that I've been sent for review, but on this case, I just don't think I can recommend the Titas. They're interesting, they're good, there's nothing wrong with them, but they're just not the best option for the amount of money you're spending on them. So thank you to Chino from OE Audio for sending these out. I wish I could recommend them more wholeheartedly. They're not bad, and if you do happen to pick a pair up, I don't think anyone's going to be completely disappointed or upset with their purchase. I just think there are better options on the market. Where these potentially could get really interesting, I should mention, is if you're interested in modding them, then those removable back caps would probably allow you to do a lot of playing and tweaking of the sound. Between that and rolling tips, there is a chance you could get something quite magical out of these, but that's not what this channel's about. I don't talk about modding and tweaking earphones and headphone designs. I talk about how they are off the shelf as the average consumer is going to buy them. And so with that in mind, I do have to steer you in different directions. If you found this review helpful, as always, I'd love it if you'd subscribe and like the video. It really helps the channel out and helps me to bring more reviews like this to you. But for now, I'll leave you to the music, so happy listening, and I'll see you here next time on Passion for Sound.